CEO of the Kansas, there we go, of the Kansas Health Foundation, to have a conversation around some of the work that they've done recently around economic mobility. So we will jump straight into the conversation and kind of do some framing. So Ed, Ed, first and foremost, kind of give a little bit of background about yourself and then kind of not just what the Kansas Health Foundation does overall, but how the Kansas Health Foundation has found itself into this work.
Yeah, you bet, Jonathan. And honored to join this group. I'm a big fan of what's going on in Tulsa. I've been there a few times. You all are a happening place, and a lot of people in my part of the world really look up to what's happening in Tulsa and aspire to figure out how we can be um, a better version of ourselves and follow your lead on a lot of things. I know you are a group that probably sees the gap that exists in Tulsa between where you are and where you want to be. And I just want you to know that there are a lot of folks in other parts of the world who see really great things. And I know you and your colleagues are all part of that. So happy to join this Mosaic group. Yeah, Jonathan, a little quick background on me. So I'm the CEO of the Kansas Health Foundation, uh, but a long background in civic life in Kansas. Used to be in the Kansas House of Representatives, worked for one of our former governors, then spent 16 years starting a statewide organization called the Kansas Leadership Center, and then 4 years ago became CEO of the Kansas Health Foundation. So I've been, kind of one job my whole life, working on improving Kansas, but that's been expressed a few different ways. Jonathan and I go back, a long ways, and we've learned from each other over the years. So I'm always honored, Jonathan, to be able to join you in a conversation, and especially a chance to learn what's going on in Tulsa, and to share anything we're doing here that might be useful to your group. A little more background specifically by the Kansas Health Foundation, and then Jonathan, I'll let you kind of guide the conversation where you want it. But we're an endowed foundation. I know you have these in Oklahoma as well. We got our start 41 years ago when a hospital, a nonprofit hospital, sold to a for-profit company. That led to a $200 million endowment that became our foundation. We've grown that money to about 700 million now, and we've given away about 600 million over the years. But we're the type of foundation that doesn't raise money. We have some money and we spend some of that in strategic ways to try to advance health in our state. And maybe the only other thing I'd say right now in terms of background is we think of health very broadly. We don't think of it as health care, although we care deeply about health care. We think of it as the broad, social determinants of health. And as everybody knows intuitively, the biggest determinant of your health is your economic status, which is why we've been so involved with things like economic mobility, upward mobility, in more recent years. Jonathan, I could babble on more about myself, but let me hand it back to you and let you shape this conversation.
Thanks, Ed. You all recently did your big statewide convening in called Fuse, Kansas. And in that, you all focused on creating a blueprint for upward mobility, really diving into tackling income inequality, in Kansas. And first, I wanted to ask, from a coalition building standpoint, how did you all kind of guide, like, how did you all get to building a coalition together to talk specifically about upward mobility?
Yeah, so a lot of different ways to answer that question. First of all, as a foundation, a lot of people think about foundations and they think that the power a foundation has is giving grants. And we certainly think of grants as one of the tools in our toolkit, but we think of it as just one, and probably not even the primary. And we just have learned that there's something about being a foundation that, like, we can convene people, we can gather people, we can get people to listen to us or to each other. There's something about when you give away money, people will listen or they'll show up at meetings, and we all understand that. But so we've tried to use that power appropriately. And we think one of the appropriate ways we can use that power is to think of ourselves as a catalyst for what are the types of coalitions that need to be developed and come together that don't currently exist. Um, Another way to think about your question, Jonathan, is, and I won't get too far into the weeds on this with you all, but every year the states are ranked 1 to 50 on health. And it's done by United Health, the nation's largest insurance company. Kansas used to be one of the healthiest states in the nation. No state fell further. We fell as low as number 31. We're trying to turn that around. And the way we're doing that is each year we begin a 3 to 4 year surge of effort, grant making, convening, strategic communication, policy work, a 3 to 4 year surge of effort on one of the 53 measures inside America's health rankings. So we always have, three of these or four of these going on at any given time. But one of those measures inside America's health rankings is income inequality. And that's one we chose to work on. We talk about it as upward mobility because what we learned early on is if we talk about it as income inequality, we get too many people who are worried that we're going to want to put a ceiling on people's income and lower that ceiling. And we don't want to give that impression. What we want to do is raise the floor for people. So we talk about it as upward mobility, but technically the focus is on income inequality. By the way, quick little sidebar. There's an effort starting in Oklahoma. I don't know if you all have heard much about it, but there's a former member of your state Senate that has started an organization to focus on helping Oklahoma climb the health rankings. Oklahoma is persistently in the mid 40s on their health rankings. And that effort is underway, and we're going to try to coordinate and be helpful and learn from each other. But income inequality is a part of health. And that was our entree to thinking about it, to talking about it. It's also a great proxy for a lot of other issues that really matter, that are important to us here at the Kansas Health Foundation, and I think are probably important to the Tulsa Regional Chamber as well.
Thanks, Ed. That's great information about how you all kind of came to this. So let's dive right into it. One of the things that you all kind of call out, you know,
Yeah.
is the how race and equity and like how race and racism like affect
Yeah.
this topic, right?
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about how that has landed. Talk about, as you were having these discussions, how did you work through some of the maybe more uncomfortable moments
Yeah.
of that? And really, how are you all framing that as you move forward with your work to make progress in this topic?
Yeah, yeah, Jonathan. So look, we all know these are interesting times for those of us who care deeply about whatever we want to call the work, racial equity, DEI, whatever our words are. These have been an interesting few years as we've all tried to figure out how do we keep advancing that work. Um, it's a very important body of work to the Kansas Health Foundation. We have what we call a three-part purpose, right? Part one is to help Kansas lead the nation in health. But we know we can't climb the health rankings just by helping healthy people get healthier. So the second part of our purpose is to help eliminate the inequities that are creating health disparities. Uh, so, I mean, that's just key. I mean, that is absolutely key. We all know it's not a level playing field. And, and that's gotten a little harder to talk about lately in our country, but we're committed to still talking about it and working on it. And we feel like we just have to be smart about how to go about doing that. Um, but so, I mean, from our perspective, we can't climb the health rankings without talking about inequities, without addressing inequities. Many of the inequities are rooted in historical um, things like racism. Explicit racism of the past that maybe took the form of then systemic racism of the present. Uh, and it's a very important kind of focus of ours. I used to be in politics, as I said before, so my brain naturally works politically. And a lot of what I've spent the last few years, my team and I have spent trying to think about is how do we, on one hand, be unabashedly focused on eliminating inequities that create health disparities and not shy away from that just because of current political um, conversations that are happening. But on the other hand, how do we do it in a way that's smart and strategic and will help us draw people into the conversation rather than just send signals to people about who's supposed to be in the conversation and who's not supposed to be in the conversation? I'm not saying we always get that done correctly, but that's our objective. A couple things just to kind of riff on here for a minute, Jonathan. One of them is I find if we lead with a topic like upward mobility rather than leading with a topic like um, like race and racism, it it helps us reach different people into the conversation. If the race and racism piece of it, if the inequity piece of it is a part of a conversation that's bigger, or that maybe not bigger, that might be the wrong way to put it. But if it's part of a conversation about a topic like income inequality or upward mobility, my experience is it can be a little easier to bring people into that conversation versus if it's the conversation. So I think that is a piece of it. We also we published a book last year. It's a very niche book. It's called Leading Health: How You and 30,000 Kansans Help Communities Thrive. It'll never become a bestseller. It'll probably never get sold. Probably never buy. There'll never be a copy sold in Oklahoma. But in that book, like there's a chapter in that book about race and racism, and it's just a little chapter. But we worked really hard to try to write that chapter in a way that that most folks, no matter where they are on that political continuum, could read it and say, like, yeah, I think there's something there. I kind of get where they're coming from. Um, and I think we succeeded with that chapter. And so it's a long, rambling answer to your questions, Jonathan, but we think it's critical we don't shy away from having these conversations and talking about the connections between things like race and racism and the existing levels of income inequality. Like we can't ignore that. We also think we have to be very smart and strategic about how we do it, and leading with the issue like upward mobility, income inequality, and then engaging into the conversation about the connection to race and racism seems to be working to some degree in our current coalition building work here.
Thank you for that, Ed. It's a very difficult and complex issue, and just knowing, with your time at the Kansas Leadership Center and you built a long history of handling
Yeah.
very complex issues, and I appreciate you all not shying away from, making sure this is part of your work. I mean, even as of yesterday, we had an election here about, and one of the state questions was around minimum wage, and it ended up failing. Now, a lot of people have a lot of different things to say about it because it's tied to CGI and kind of some of the national things that scared some people. But it's going to be a conversation that we continue to talk about over the next coming years, and as we go through even more political cycles. So, we know that these types of inequality conversations will continue to come up
Yeah.
uh, as we move forward. So, interesting way for how you all been able to kind of discuss some of that. And for those of you all listening, please use the chat. There'll be a time for questions. If you have questions now, put them in. Utilize the chat, and we'll make sure they get asked. I'll also put questions in the chat for you all to kind of chime in on, uh, so that you all can have some engagement there. I always like to see the chat active when we're having these types of discussions. Um, so Ed, as you talked about looking through the framing of this and how you all kind of built this, talk a little bit about, the Alice data and how that threshold, how has there been alignment in that threshold? Is there conflict from what you've seen in you all's work with in this topic?
Yeah, and I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with the ALICE data, but ALICE, it's great data. And ALICE stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. ALICE is a data set that the United Way all across America has been calculating and sharing, and it's really describing the working poor. It's describing the people in our communities who are working often multiple jobs, but still unable to make enough money to to get by. And so a couple thoughts. One, it's brilliant framing around getting good conversation on how do you help those types of families. And we've all been in conversations. I assume we've all been in conversations where you're talking about trying to help people, and the debate ends up being around, well, why would we want to help people who won't help themselves, or why do we want to help people who won't get off the couch and work? And the beauty of the Alice data is it's not about people who are on the couch not willing to work. It's about people who are working hard. It's about people who are probably working harder than any of us, and still are struggling to make enough money in order to afford a basic survival budget. So, in some ways, like a couple of the things, just trying to think while speaking right now, like a couple of things in the conversation we're having already today are about like how do we get to a conversation about something like inequities, but how do you get to it? Like in so many places, if you start having that conversation about inequities, it doesn't go anywhere because that topic has become so polarized. So, like talking about the Alice data, frankly, is going to get you to conversations about inequities, or talking about building more pathways for upward mobility, or talking about income inequality is going to get you, with good facilitation and a good kind of design, is going to get you to talking about inequities. But it's a better starting point, I think, especially for this current moment. So yeah, the Alice data has been really powerful for us. It's been an incredibly useful tool. I'm assuming there's Alice data. It looks like somebody's put something in the chat there related to Oklahoma. But it has been a game changer for us in creating conversation with people, unifying conversation with people about how do we help serve members of our communities, who are struggling the most. It's been really, really powerful. And again, it's not a perfect proxy for talking about inequities, but it becomes kind of a backdoor way of talking about inequities, which is great. And then it leads to some great conversation. But we got to get people into conversation first.
And you all produced the 16-page report, which I'll share out with everyone after this conversation. Talk a little bit about what were some of the biggest like aha moments in some of the things that you all discovered. Were there some things in your report that you were like, I never thought about this in this way? And how are you using that report to kind of move forward with the conversation?
Yeah, so part of it is just kind of our role, we think, as a statewide endowed foundation. So we began to focus on upward mobility. Um, we we believed that our role wasn't to articulate what needs to happen in Kansas. We felt strongly that our role was to use our stature, our credibility, our positioning to draw the right people together to co-create, we use the word blueprint, to co-create a blueprint of what is needed to happen in Kansas to create more upward mobility. Will then so that blueprint emerged in this gathering that Jonathan referenced earlier. He'll share the blueprint later. Um, we're really proud of it. It's not revolutionary, but what's revolutionary about it is the process by which it was created. So it actually was that event was the culmination of a year's worth of engagement and listening and conversation with a lot of different organizations and people connected to the issue of upward mobility. So when we say this thing was co-created, it was co-created by hundreds and hundreds of people, um, thousands and thousands of comments tracked throughout the course of almost 12 months that culminated in this event, this 3-day event where this blueprint emerged. And it's, time will tell how powerful it is, but it was it was created in April. It's already helping align resources in the state and energy and attention. It's doing exactly what we wanted it to do. The co-creation and publication of that blueprint is now getting more and more people to orient around the ideas in the blueprint. Um, it is the type of thing where like we will now give grants to help resource some of the strategies that are in the blueprint. But there's going to be a lot more happening, we believe, related to the blueprint than just things we're funding. And that's based on the whole design of facilitating this engagement and frankly going slow so we can go fast later, going slow and gathering this coalition and getting lots of input. The whole point behind it was to create the conditions for people to, everybody wants to be a part of something bigger than themselves. Everybody wants to be a part of something that feels bigger than just their organization. Maybe not everybody, but my experience is most people. And so what we tried to do with this journey is make it as easy as possible for people to have input on this development of this blueprint around upward mobility. And in doing so, make it as likely as possible that they will all help fan the flames of this blueprint, even if they're not going to receive a grant from us someday. That's what we're thinking is happening. I think in terms of Jonathan, what surprised me the most about it was how just how hungry people are for good collaboration, how hungry people are to be a part of something where like 2 + 2 = 10. We've all been a part of really, well, maybe not all of us, but a lot of us have been a part of crummy collaboration, collaboration that feels draining, that feels de-energizing, where eventually people stop coming to the meetings. And what I've noticed and what this process affirmed and really taught us in a big surprising way is just how much people crave being a part of co-creating something that is an honest co-creation that wasn't already baked. And now we're asking for some faux engagement to kind of make it look like there was collaboration. But to be a part of something that honestly, there was a blank slate to begin with and a good, healthy process with the right people and good information led to something pretty powerful. Now, time will tell what the outcome is of all that, but we're optimistic. We feel pretty good with where we are on it right now.
Thanks, Ed. Adding on to that level of conversation, obviously, your convening was focused on individuals. Can you talk a little bit about how employers in the business community have started to engage in this conversation? Where have they found positive ways to engage, and where have they kind of, for lack of a better terms, kind of stayed away from, just out of, feeling like it's out of their lane in some cases?
Yeah, John, that's a good question. I mean, this might not be of interest to you guys, but one thing that has been interesting about this for us is, I mean, we're a foundation. Most of our partners historically have been nonprofits. Focusing on this topic of upward mobility, and the way we focused on it has helped us create a lot of partnerships with the private sector we didn't have before. I would say there's a lot of interest inside. Well, I want to be careful. I don't want to overstate. We've experienced some significant interest from some companies in trying to figure out how to be a part of creating more pathways in the community for upward mobility. Our economic development organization in Wichita has launched an initiative all around upward mobility, which was a really huge sign for us. The whole body of work now happening connected to the Greater Wichita Partnership, which you know how these organizations work, right? The most significant companies in town are behind that effort. That was a big win when they embraced the idea of of an initiative focused on upward mobility. Um, and at a time when a lot of organizations like that, or a lot of companies might be struggling, rightly or wrongly, but might be struggling to continue their enthusiasm for some of the equity type work that maybe was happening in the past. I do think this is giving some of those companies a way to still engage with something that, frankly, is equity based, but we're helping them with the framing in a way that is, I think, pretty powerful and pretty useful.
Talk a little bit about the framing conversations because, it's like you said, given our current climate, it's a little bit harder than what it was certainly in like 2021 here in Tulsa, uh, to really get companies to engage and commit to this type of work. What were those conversations like, and what were some of the things that ultimately pushed GWP and their entities to kind of start getting involved and getting on board with this?
Yeah, like here in Wichita, 40% of the families fall below the Alice threshold. Okay, so the Alice threshold is a budget that's put together that is, they call it the survival budget. So it's basically just the budget you need for like a family of four to pay for the basics. Nothing above the basics. No vacations, no Christmas presents, no savings for retirement, but just to pay for a kind of a basic survival budget. 40% of the families in Wichita fall below that. And for an employer that relies on the health, the economic health of this community as a piece of their strategy of success, that's a shocking number, right? Like, I don't know about Tulsa, but like the poverty rate, the federal poverty rate in Wichita has pretty much remained unchanged for decades. But the Alice rate, the number of families, the number of individuals who are under the Alice threshold has been on the rise for the last 15, 16 years. And that data, I think, is alarming for people, and especially for good, kind of community-minded corporate citizens. Uh, there's something about that data that just helps them think about like, well, they have to get involved because they see if the trend line continues, there aren't going to be enough people to buy their products, or they're not going to be enough workers to hire who had enough, or they won't be enough workers who aren't struggling to survive. And having a workforce that's struggling to survive is not a pathway to an economic prosperous company. So that data has been really, really useful and powerful. Um, I think another key thing we just learned is the idea of saying we want to raise, when talking to the private sector, especially saying that we want to raise the floor, we want there to be more economic opportunity for people. That resonates. If we talk about income inequality, uh, we found that a lot of them will think we're trying to lower the ceiling, which is again why we tend to use the term upward mobility rather than income inequality, even though income inequality is what we're after. And we're not sneaky about that. I mean, on our blueprint, we call it a upward mobility blueprint to reduce income inequality. So we're not being sneaky about it, but we are being strategic with what words we emphasize and when. But those are a few of my thoughts, Jonathan. I think here, like the companies in 2020, 2021 that that were stepping up to figure out what more they could do on some of the social issues that were catching attention then are frankly the same companies that are stepping up in this community now on this topic. So I think in some ways it's about those of us who care about these social causes, who care about creating thriving, healthy communities. How do we do the work to figure out how do we position these conversations in a way that enables the private sector to say, yes, I'm in. And that's one way to think about what we've been trying to do up here. And again, time will tell what the outcomes are going to be, but we feel optimistic right now.
Thank you for that, Ed. What's your honest assessment of the biggest threat to the momentum you have right now?
Yeah, I think it's like a lot of things that folks like I can imagine the type of people who are in this meeting. Um, it's just like can we keep it going? There's no magic answer. There's no like if we just pass this one bill in the legislature, all of a sudden there's going to be lots of upward mobility. It's 1,000 actions needed from 1,000 different people or organizations, sustained over time. And and so like how do we just keep it going is the biggest threat to it. Um, I think a lot of us have heard a lot about kind of the collective impact model. There are things about the collective impact model I love. There are other things that I worry about. But the concept of a backbone organization to kind of carry the coordination of the work we all know is so critical. We're trying to play kind of the part of that kind of ongoing coordination effort on this topic and others. Um, but I worry about like can we do it? Well, people keep coming to the table when it's not the new thing. How do we make sure that's not the case that they do keep coming? But that's what worries me the most, Jonathan.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, as we continue to start to think about kind of where you following in your footsteps in this and thinking about how do we figure out a process? What are some words of wisdom or some advice that you would give any community that's wanting to start to really get into this effort in a sustainable way, not for to have to say that they just had a meeting and a month from now they don't hear anything back. How can we sustainably create an effort that moves forward in progress?
I have been blessed with a lot of mentors in kind of the world of civic and community process work. And one of the things I learned early on is that there's really a pretty simple formula if you want great things to happen. You need to bring the right people together, which, by the way, aren't always the usual people, right? But you need to bring the right people together and, times um, really good information, which isn't always the obvious information, times a healthy process of engagement. Like those three things, the right people, good information, and a healthy process, you get results every time. But if one of those three things is missing, and if I was at a whiteboard, actually I do behind me, but I won't draw it up there. But I always draw it as a multiplication equation. The right people times the right information times a healthy process equals results, good results. I always do it as multiplication because if one of those things is a zero, the whole thing zeroes out, as we all know from our arithmetic days. But so I think for Mosaic, for the Tulsa Chamber, I think it's just thinking through what does that equation look like in your situation? Frankly, on this topic or any other civic endeavor you all are a part of, my guess is you can point to things in Tulsa that were wildly successful because that equation was followed. And you could likely point to things in Tulsa that fell short of aspirations and expectations because something in that formula was missing. Yeah, I think tending to that formula being strong is one of the most important exercises of leadership a person, a group, a committee, or an organization can do. So that's my biggest advice, Jonathan, is tend to that formula and it'll work.
All right. And again, like I said, we're about to open it up for questions from the group. So if anybody has a question, please raise your hand or you can put it in the chat or just let me know in the chat and then you can I'll call you. You can come off mute and ask your question. But so Ed, what does progress look like for you all where you are now?
Yeah, specifically, Jonathan, on this topic of upward mobility.
Yes.
Yeah. So what we've developed, and I don't have time to tell you guys, I'd bore you if I did have the time to tell you the details of our strategy, but we've developed a quite elaborate kind of 3 to 4 year surge of work when we pick one of these topics. And so on this upward mobility topic, we're about a year and a half into that surge. And so what success looks like in the short term is more and more people and organizations, in essence, getting involved with that surge of activity. More and more people and organizations, in essence, saying there's something in this blueprint that they are going to work on. More and more people and organizations kind of joining the cause. Um, More funders working together to fund things in this blueprint to happen across Kansas. Like we have dollars to put behind this, but we don't have enough dollars to fund all the work that's needed. So success in the short term looks like more involvement from more people, from more organizations, and that involvement all oriented around this blueprint. There's something powerful that happens when you get enough people pointing to the same set of solutions. What often happens in civic life is groups come together and they have their own preferred solution. But if we can get to a common set of solutions that we can get enough people pointing to, my experience in my almost 30 years now of civic involvement in Kansas is great things can happen when that takes place. So that's in the short term. Jonathan, in the long term, it looks like lower income inequality in our state. Like that ratio, which there's a technical ratio there, like the 80-20 ratio of income, like how far apart the 20th percentile of income versus the 80th percentile is. Ideally, that narrows in our state. And we know if that happens in a way that is truly kind of systemic, if it happens, it's going to happen because families, individuals that are facing inequities are climbing the economic ladder because those are the families, those are the individuals, frankly, that are suffering from the income inequality. So it's ultimately the outcome we're after is more opportunity, more equitable opportunity, and we know that leads to greater health.
Have you started to see some specific examples of programs or efforts being built up to kind of help jumpstart some of the work here in this topic?
Yeah, that's if some of my colleagues were on the Zoom who are right in the middle of a lot of those conversations with partners, they would be able to rattle off a lot of examples. So yes, I'm going to do a poor job of coming up with some examples, but the beauty when you, when you do have some grant dollars to dangle out there, people get motivated to come up with kind of experiments. So a lot of experiments are emerging, and that's exciting for us to kind of hear about. Um, so yes, and I'm tempted to try to babble on about one or two, but I won't do it justice. So all to say is yes, we're beginning to see concrete, actionable things emerge. And my guess is over the coming months, those will become more public and there'll be things we'll be talking about and celebrating. Now, none of these things are quick fixes, though. Like any new initiative, whether it's from the Greater Wichita Partnership or some other organization, it's not like you move the needle on income inequality in a quarter. You can maybe get something going in a quarter, but it's going to take years on any of these things to actually make a difference.
Yeah, in the chat we had some people kind of talking a little bit about kind of some of the biggest barriers. Uh, childcare comes up often.
Yeah.
Transportation comes up. Are there certain topics that you're seeing or hearing more activity and motion around versus others where people are like, yeah, I'm not touching that?
Yeah, by all means. Like, so this blueprint, I mean, one of the problems with this topic of upward mobility is it's so freaking big. It means so many things. Like, what exactly does it mean? That's one of the beauties of it too, is a lot of people can see themselves in the work. So it's a kind of a double-edged sword. But yeah, so I mean, like early childhood education, there's a lot in this blueprint about that. Um, People recognize that as a key issue related to upward mobility. Um, Also, other key topics, workforce skills and pathways. Again, some of this stuff won't surprise you. Workforce supports, kind of small business and entrepreneurship supports, especially focus on communities that tend to be underrepresented when it comes to business ownership. Housing is a big plank of the work. People intuitively understand the link between housing and wealth building, housing and kind of economic, climbing the economic ladder. But one that maybe surprised me a little bit was the kind of financial protection and debt relief emerged. There's a growing understanding that there are large segments of the population that are unbankable, and that's not the bank's fault. Like banks, like will get in trouble if they give loans to people who are not credit worthy. And so banks following regulations that they have to follow, in essence, have contributed to a market for what is commonly known as like payday lending or whatever, and how much trouble some folks can get into in their economic situation when that's their only source of credit is something like a payday lending. So that surprised us, Jonathan. Like that body of work kind of emerged in this blueprint around how do we create, not from a punitive standpoint, not like how do we shut down the payday lending. That wasn't the approach at all. It was more of how do we create alternative ways for people to access financial instruments if they don't have the traditional financial instruments that all of us on this call have access to, if they don't have those. And so that was another plank that was really, really interesting that is emerging that I'm really hopeful about.
Wonderful. We did have a question we brought up first. What is the role that you're hearing or seeing education play in upward mobility as you all continue to look at that, especially as you have conversations with in the economic development space and maybe in other spaces? Where are you seeing that come about mostly?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's a ton of connection between education and upward mobility. The way it's getting expressed in this blueprint, and Jonathan will give it to you all. You'll see it. It's getting brought up around kind of higher education, like tailoring efforts more to the Alice population. So again, we're trying to push this Alice data because it's working. Like it's a great way to get people focused on populations that have a lot of barriers in front of them. So there's a push in there about tailoring higher education paths to Kansans that are below the Alice threshold. There's also a section around workforce skills and pathways. So this might look like kind of more of the vocational workforce training type programs, but designing pathways, specifically again for the Alice population. There's not a lot of K-12. There's some K-12 in here, but our state has just done a lot on K-12 recently related to creating more career pathways. And we were wanting the things in this blueprint to be kind of additive and catalytic, not restating something that felt like pretty solid and underway. So yeah, a bunch of connected education, but more on the higher ed side.
Thank you for that. I know you had mentioned there being some work from a former Oklahoma State senator here. You wouldn't happen to know what that organization is by name, would you?
I don't, but I just remember the name of the former state senator, and I don't know him at all. Greg Treat, I think his name is. I don't even know what part of the state he's from. I bet if you Googled his name and Oklahoma health ranking, you'll find the articles out there about it. Um, he and I had a 5 minute call today. In essence, him just reaching out, wanting to learn more about our effort here, and we're going to meet again here for a longer meeting in a few weeks. So I don't know anything about it, but when I saw the news, though, one, I kind of liked it. I like the competition, right? So my recollection is his goal or the goal of his organization is to get Oklahoma to the 35th ranking by 2035. So I like that. So I think Oklahoma is, I don't know, 44th or 41st or something like that right now. We're right now 27th. So I kind of like the idea of a neighboring state, like trying to be on our heels. And I like the competition, right? But I also think there's a lot we can learn from each other. And it's the ranking. This may or may not be useful to Mosaic, but that ranking, America's Health Rankings, if you look at it, it's another example of a way to get people into the conversations that really matter, but it's a different way into the conversation. That ranking is done by United Health, the nation's largest insurance company. It's a private sector company. I talk about that all the time when I'm out talking to the business community, or I'm talking to my friends who maybe are more politically aligned on the right. Um, the fact that this ranking comes from a private sector company, I think it's great. They are actually incentivized to get the ranking right, to kind of describe health correctly inside this ranking, because they'll literally make more money as an insurance company if states become healthier. They'll save money, they'll make more money. So it's been a powerful way of talking about health and the things that lead to health. Again, not health care, the broad social determinants of health. I found talking about the ranking a powerful strategy for us. I'm excited to see if it's a useful strategy in Oklahoma. Again, don't know anything about the effort. There you go, Oklahomans partner for health. Um, Maybe it'll be a great thing. I'm excited to learn more.
Ed, thank you again for, your leadership in this space, for, what we've done, for what you all are doing and continue to do in Kansas, and for being willing to share the information as you get it. And as many times as we talked about how important it is for individuals like you in this space, whose voice carries power, who has been an influential voice in leadership, to lend that to this topic,
Yeah, yeah,
to lend this to this topic, to be able to help change the thought process of people in rooms whose thought processes are probably wouldn't have been changed if it came otherwise.
yeah, yeah.
So thank you for that. And I want to give you the opportunity to just share any parting words with us as we think about how we start as a state to really tackle this issue, and try to diagnose progress and try to find solutions to this critical opportunity.
Yeah, John, well, hey, thanks again for the opportunity. Appreciate the work of Mosaic, appreciate the work of the Tulsa Chamber. And Jonathan, always appreciate the chance to connect with you. Uh, my biggest closing part of advice would be focus more on process than on solutions. Um, get the process right, you'll get progress. But if you start by trying to solve the issue, if you start by trying to come up with what the answer is to greater income inequality or to greater upward mobility, and you'll end up coming up with your preferred solution, and you'll just be in a set of conversations with people debating their preferred solutions. And if you can instead put your energy into creating the conditions for people to co-generate a set of solutions that were co-created, all of my experience in civic life tells me you're going to make more progress. It's going to feel slow, but eventually you'll be going a lot faster, a lot farther than you would have gone before. But Jonathan, I appreciate the time with your group.
Ed, thank you again. For all those who joined us today, thank you for your time. Again, these types of discussions and this work would not be possible if it wasn't for our generous sponsors, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Oklahoma, CF Industries, One Gas, One Oak, and Williams. We appreciate their support in the chamber and us doing this work. The last thing I will do is I will highlight the next portion of this conversation for from a chamber perspective will be happening next Thursday at our 2026 State of Inclusion. I will put the link in the chat for you to get more information. We're excited to have Tawana Black from the Center of Economic Inclusion in Minneapolis, Minnesota, talking about why inclusive economies are the only sustainable competitive strategy. Again, focusing on how we can make sure that we are being inclusive in our economic strategy so that we can continue to grow as a city and thus grow as a state and be the best state that we can be. I appreciate all of you all's attention and engagement. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and happy Juneteenth. Happy Juneteenth to you all. So thank you all, and I will talk to you all soon.
Take care, everyone.